The screaming started before anyone could reach the emergency lockdown button. Professor Zalthor's xenobiology lecture had been proceeding normally, 23 students from 7 different species, all dutifully taking notes on apex predator behavioral patterns, when the reinforced containment unit suddenly cracked. Not the hairline fracture kind of crack. The explosive, cascading failure kind that sent crystalline shards scattering across the lecture hall floor. The Kra'vaxian death-stalker inside didn't hesitate. 300 pounds of muscle, chitin, and razor-sharp evolutionary perfection burst from the failing container with a shriek that made every prey species instinct in the room scream run. Its 6 compound eyes immediately locked onto the nearest movement. A Thessian student frantically scrambling backward, her chairs clattering. The creature's hunting posture was textbook perfect. Low center of gravity, mandibles spread wide. The bioluminescent threat display along its spine flaring electric blue. This was exactly the kind of predator that had driven the Thessians to develop space travel 3 centuries early. Their entire civilization had evolved in the shadow of these apex hunters, their technology born from desperate necessity rather than curiosity. The Thessian girl knew exactly what came next. Everyone in the room knew. Kra'vaxian death-stalkers didn't give warnings. They didn't posture. When they displayed, when those spine lights flickered to life, you had maybe 2 seconds before they struck. 1 second. The creature coiled, its powerful hindquarters tensing. 2 seconds. It launched. And then the human moved. Jake Thompson had been sitting in the back row, as he usually did, sketching something in his datapad instead of paying attention to the lecture. Most of the other students had learned to ignore the human exchange student. His species was new to the Galactic Council, barely a decade into first contact, and their reputation was complicated. Humans were Category 4 Deathworlders, which meant they came from a planet so ridiculously hostile that most species considered it uninhabitable. They had predator eyes, forward-facing, binocular vision designed for tracking prey. They had persistence hunting instincts that let them literally chase animals to death over hours or even days. Their planet had weather that could kill you, water that fell from the sky, and an atmospheric oxygen content so high it was technically flammable. But they were also soft, squishy. No natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. They'd somehow clawed their way to the top of their food chain through sheer stubbornness and the ability to throw things accurately. So when Jake Thompson moved, nobody expected what happened next. He didn't run. He didn't freeze. He didn't even reach for a weapon. He intercepted the death-stalker mid-leap with his bare hands. The impact should have killed him. 300 pounds of armored predator moving at full hunting speed, colliding with a 180-pound human with no protective gear. The sound of the collision echoed through the lecture hall like a thunderclap. Flesh meeting chitin, the wet crunch of contact. They hit the ground together in a tangle of limbs and mandibles. The room held its collective breath. 17 different species waited for the inevitable. The screaming, the blood, the death-stalker rising from its kill with mandibles dripping. Instead, they heard laughter. Human laughter. Hey, easy there, big guy. Jake's voice carried across the stunned silence, slightly strained but unmistakably amused. You're okay. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Yeah, I know, scary room, scary aliens, I get it. Professor Zalthor's 3 eye stalks bent in ways that should have been anatomically impossible, trying to process what he was seeing. The human had somehow rolled with the impact, using the creature's own momentum to guide them into a controlled tumble. Now he was on the ground with the death-stalker, his hands moving in slow, deliberate patterns across its carapace. The creature's threat display flickered, hesitated. Its mandibles, which should have been buried in soft human flesh, trembled uncertainly. That's it, Jake continued, his voice dropping to that strange, soft tone humans used with animals. Just a little disoriented. Huh? Don't worry, buddy. We're gonna figure this out. The Thessian girl, still pressed against the far wall, made a sound that her translator couldn't process. Her species had fought a 300-year war against these creatures. They'd developed plasma weapons, force fields, and orbital defense systems specifically to counter them. And this human was petting one. Someone want to tell me, Jake called out, still maintaining eye contact with the death-stalker. Why this guy was in a cracked containment unit in the first place? Because I'm getting some seriously stressed out vibes here. That's when Professor Zalthor realized something that would change everything he thought he knew about Deathworld species and their relationship with predators. The human wasn't dominating the creature. He was comforting it. Professor Zalthor's emergency communication to campus security went unanswered for exactly 4 minutes. An eternity when facing an escaped apex predator. But by the time the armed response team burst through the lecture hall doors, weapons charged and ready, they found something that would require 3 separate incident reports and a complete revision of the xenobiology department's safety protocols. The human was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and the Kra'vaxian death-stalker had its massive head resting in his lap. "Stand down!" Zalthor's voice cracked across 3 octaves, stopping the security team before they could fire. Not because he cared about preserving the specimen, though he did, but because shooting plasma weapons near the human seemed catastrophically unwise at this point. Jake didn't even look up at the commotion. His hands continued their steady movement across the creature's carapace, following patterns that seemed instinctive rather than learned. The death-stalker's bioluminescent spine had shifted from threatening blue to a soft, pulsing amber, a color most xenobiologists didn't even know the species could produce. The containment unit's environmental controls were failing, Jake said, his voice carrying that same calm, measured tone. Temperature was spiking, humidity was dropping. This guy wasn't trying to attack anyone. He was trying to escape a dying tank. One of the security officers, a XNAR with military-grade combat armor, kept her weapon trained on the creature. "Sir, humans may not understand. That is Kra'vaxian death-stalker. Category 9 predator. Has killed thousands across 17 systems." "Yeah, I can read the warning labels," Jake replied, finally glancing up. "I can also read stress signals. Watch." He shifted his hand to a specific segment of the creature's carapace, just behind what humans would call the shoulder blade. His fingers pressed in a rhythmic pattern, not random but deliberate. The death-stalker's entire body responded, the tension visibly draining from its muscles. Its mandibles, which had been held in a neutral position, slowly relaxed until they were nearly folded against its jaw structure. The amber pulse from its spine deepened, steadied. "Okay," the XNAR security officer said slowly. "What is human doing?" "Belly rubs," Jake said simply. "Well, the alien equivalent. See this section here?" He indicated the segment he'd been working on. "It's a neural cluster point. Lots of Earth predators have similar structures. If you know where to apply pressure, it triggers a parasympathetic response. Basically tells the body it's safe to relax." Professor Zalthor's translator struggled with several of the terms, but the practical demonstration was undeniable. The creature that had terrorized civilizations for millennia was currently producing a sound that the acoustic sensors classified as somewhere between purring and humming. "This is not possible," Zalthor whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Kra'vaxians cannot be domesticated. They have no social bonding mechanisms. They are pure hunters." "With all due respect, Professor," Jake said, and something in his tone suggested the respect was somewhat limited. "You're looking at this wrong. Just because something's an apex predator doesn't mean it doesn't have emotional needs. Fear, stress, comfort, these aren't mammalian inventions. They're survival mechanisms." This guy was terrified. A Theshan voice from somewhere in the back of the room, the same student who'd nearly been attacked, spoke up shakily. "Terrified?" It displayed aggression patterns. Standard pre-strike behavior. Jake shook his head. It displayed panic patterns. There's a difference. The threat display was defensive, not offensive. The posture was wrong for an actual attack, center of gravity too high, escape route kept clear. It was ready to run, not hunt. When I intercepted, it could have eviscerated me in half a second. But look. He held up his arms, showing unblemished skin. Not a scratch. Pulled every strike. The security team exchanged glances. The XNAR officer slowly lowered her weapon, though she didn't power it down. "So human is saying," she began carefully, "that instinct for dealing with predators on human homeworld works on alien predators too?" Jake's grin was the kind that had made other species uncomfortable since humans joined the Galactic Council. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it showed too many teeth and carried too much confidence. "Lady," he said, "where I come from, we turned wolves into chihuahuas in about 15,000 years. This guy, he's just a very large, very stressed cat who needs someone to understand him." The death-stalker's contented humming intensified, as if agreeing. Within an hour, the lecture hall had transformed into an impromptu command center. The dean of xenobiological studies had arrived personally, a rare occurrence that spoke to the severity of the situation. Dean Korthales was a Zentari, a species known for their methodical approach to science and their deep-seated fear of anything that could kill them, which included approximately 70% of known fauna in the galaxy. He stood a safe 20 meters from Jake and the death-stalker, his sensory fronds twitching with barely contained anxiety. "Explain," Korthales demanded, his translator rendering his whistling speech into flat, authoritative tones. "Explain how human student with no xenobiology training has accomplished what 3 centuries of research said was impossible." Jake had managed to coax the death-stalker into a more comfortable position. The creature now lay on its side, its 6 legs tucked in a posture that Professor Zalthor's frantic datapad notes indicated was usually only seen in deceased specimens. One of Jake's hands rested on the creature's flank, maintaining the contact that seemed to keep it calm. "It's not that complicated," Jake said, though the looks he was getting suggested everyone else thought it absolutely was. "On Earth, we learned a long time ago that understanding predator behavior isn't about dominance or fear. It's about communication and respect." "Earth?" Korthales repeated, his fronds shriveling slightly. "Planet with hostile megafauna. Planet where everything tries to kill everything else. Planet that produces species crazy enough to make pets of apex predators. We call them dogs, and they're very good boys," Jake replied. "But yeah, basically, the thing is, predators aren't mindless killing machines. They're intelligent, adaptive, and capable of complex emotional states. This death-stalker isn't angry or vicious. It's been kept in inadequate conditions, probably for months based on the stress markers in its carapace." Professor Zalthor stepped forward, emboldened by curiosity overcoming his self-preservation instincts. "What stress markers? I have studied Kra'vaxians for 17 years. I see no such indicators." Jake pointed to several sections of the creature's armor plating. "See these microfractures? And the way the bioluminescent cells are clustered unevenly? That's chronic stress. On Earth, we see similar patterns in captive predators kept in poor conditions, tigers with worn teeth, bears with repetitive behaviors. This guy's been suffering." The accusation hung in the air. Around the lecture hall, students shifted uncomfortably. The xenobiology program was supposed to be humane, ethical, a model for proper species study. "Our containment protocols meet all council standards," Korthales said defensively. "Yeah, well, maybe your council standards suck," Jake shot back, his protective instincts clearly extending to the creature now breathing steadily under his hand. "This is a living being, not a specimen. It needs proper environmental controls, adequate space, mental stimulation. How long has it been in that tank?" Zalthor checked his datapad. Specimen Kra 447 was acquired 4 months ago from a rescue operation on Thesha Prime. It was deemed too dangerous to release and too valuable for research to euthanize. "For months in a tank that small?" Jake's voice carried an edge now, the kind that made several students lean away. "No wonder it freaked out. Imagine being locked in a closet for 4 months. You'd break down the door too." The death-stalker stirred slightly, responding to the tension in Jake's voice. Immediately, the human shifted his tone, returning to those soothing sounds, his hand resuming its rhythmic movement. The creature settled again. "Demonstrate something else," Korthales ordered, his scientific curiosity warring with his instinctive fear. "Prove this is not anomaly, not luck." Jake considered this, then looked at the death-stalker. "Hey, buddy, think you can show these folks you're not a monster? Work with me here." What happened next would be replayed in xenobiology classes for the next decade. Jake slowly stood up, his hand maintaining contact with the creature until the last possible moment. Then he took 3 steps away, turned his back, and waited. Every prey species in the room tensed. Turning your back on a predator was suicide. Basic survival tactics taught to children across 100 worlds. The death-stalker lifted its head, tracked Jake's movement with all 6 eyes, and then, slowly, deliberately, followed him. Not stalking, not hunting, walking beside him like a trained companion animal. "Good boy," Jake said, and meant it. The next 48 hours became what Dean Corthales would later describe as the most educationally valuable and regulation-violating period in university history. Jake had refused to leave the Deathstalker, which meant the Deathstalker refused to leave Jake, which meant the xenobiology department suddenly had an unofficial human consultant who treated council safety protocols as friendly suggestions. By the second day, Jake had transformed the creature's holding area. Gone was the sterile, cramped tank. In its place was an expanded habitat with variable terrain, climate-controlled zones, and what Jake called enrichment items. Objects that the Deathstalker could manipulate, hunt, and interact with. Predators need mental stimulation, Jake explained to a growing audience of students who'd abandoned their other classes to watch. In the wild, hunting isn't just about eating. It's problem-solving, strategy, adapting to changing conditions. Lock any intelligent creature in a box with nothing to do, and it'll go crazy. The Deathstalker was currently engaged with what Jake had designed as a puzzle feeder, a complex arrangement of sliding panels and pressure plates that released food rewards. The creature's 6 eyes tracked the mechanism intently, its claws manipulating the controls with surprising delicacy. Professor Zalthor watched with undisguised fascination. In 17 years of study, I never observed tool-use behavior in Kra'vaxians. Because you never gave them tools to use, Jake replied. You watched them in survival mode, stressed, defensive, operating on pure instinct. This is what they look like when they're actually thinking. A Karathi student whose species had evolved from prey animals raised a tentative appendage. But human Jake, is this not dangerous? Teaching Predator to be more efficient problem solver. Jake grinned. Only if you plan on being its problem. Look, here's what people don't get about predators. We are predators, humans, we've got the forward-facing eyes, the persistence hunting, the whole package. And yeah, we're really good at killing things when we need to. But we're also really good at not killing things. That's the part everyone forgets. He walked closer to the habitat, and the Deathstalker immediately paused its puzzle solving to track his approach. But there was no aggression in the movement, just attention, awareness, recognition. Predators form bonds, Jake continued. They have to. On Earth, wolves hunt in packs. Lions form prides. Even solitary hunters like leopards have complex social behaviors. The idea that predators are emotionless killing machines, that's a prey species myth. It makes you feel safer to believe the thing that might eat you is just a mindless monster. But Kra'vaxians are solitary, Zalthor protested. They show no pack behavior. Solitary doesn't mean antisocial, Jake countered. Tigers are solitary. So are leopards. They still form bonds with their young, still have territorial relationships with neighbors, still communicate through scent marking and vocalizations. Social behavior isn't the same as pack behavior. To demonstrate, Jake entered the habitat, ignoring the horrified gasps from several students. The Deathstalker immediately approached, its movements fluid and purposeful. It circled Jake once, its sensory organs extended, clearly checking him over. Then it did something that made Zalthor's translator emit a sound of complete bafflement. It presented its dorsal surface to Jake, lowering its body in a posture of vulnerability. See that? Jake said, kneeling beside the creature. That's trust. It's showing me its vulnerable spots, the gaps in the carapace, the soft tissue between plates. In predator language, that's huge. That's saying, I know you could hurt me, but I trust you won't. His hands found those same neural cluster points he'd discovered during their first encounter. The Deathstalker's bioluminescent spine flickered through several colors before settling into a deep, satisfied purple. This is unprecedented, Korthalis breathed, his fronds fully extended now in scientific rapture. We must document everything. Every interaction, every behavioral pattern. Sure, Jake agreed. But on one condition. This guy needs proper care going forward. Better habitats for all your specimens. Enrichment programs. Regular interaction with people who actually understand predator psychology. And his name is Razor. I'm not calling him Specimen Kra 447. The newly named Razor made that contented humming sound again, as if approving of the arrangement. Zalthor looked at his datapad, then at the scene before him, then back at his datapad. Somewhere in his 17 years of research notes were hundreds of pages describing Kra'vaxian death-stalkers as irredeemable killing machines. He deleted the file and started a new one. Title: Predator Cognition and Emotional Complexity. Observations by Human Jake Thompson and Subject Razor. The Galactic Council's response came on the third day, delivered by High Inquisitor Velzaran of the Predator Control Authority, the organization responsible for managing dangerous species across Council space. Velzaran was a Kickstar, a species that had evolved under constant threat from megafauna and had developed an entire culture around predator elimination. He arrived with a squad of enforcement officers and a military-grade containment unit. The specimen will be transferred to a maximum security facility, Velzaran announced, his chitinous mandibles clicking with authority. The human will be evaluated for psychological contamination. This situation has violated 17 safety protocols and demonstrates clear Deathworlder instability. Jake stepped between Velzaran and Razor's habitat. Nobody's taking him anywhere. The lecture hall, which had become something of a pilgrimage site for students across campus, went silent. 50-plus students from a dozen species watched as a human student faced down a Galactic Council authority with nothing but conviction. Velzaran's compound eyes gleamed. Human does not have authority to refuse Council mandate. Step aside or be removed. On what grounds are you taking him? Jake demanded. He hasn't hurt anyone. He's been completely peaceful for 3 days. Kra'vaxian deathstalkers are classified as Category 9 predators. Council law mandates permanent containment or termination. There are no exceptions. Then your law is wrong, Jake said simply. The enforcement officers moved forward, but Professor Zalthor surprised everyone by stepping beside Jake. I must support the human's position, he said, his voice steadier than anyone expected. My observations over the past 72 hours have revealed significant errors in our fundamental understanding of Kra'vaxian behavior. The classification may need revision. Science does not override security, Velzaran snapped. How many civilizations must suffer before Council learns? Thessians lost 3 colony worlds to these creatures. Korvathi massacre killed millions. These are not beings that can be trusted. Those attacks happened because you cornered wounded apex predators and gave them no choice but to fight, Jake argued. You ever wonder why humans manage to coexist with our megafauna long enough to develop civilization? It's because we learned the difference between a predator and a threat. Explain difference, one of the enforcement officers demanded, weapons still raised. Jake gestured to Razor, who watched the confrontation with alert but calm attention. A predator kills to eat, to defend itself, to protect territory. A threat kills because it wants to. Razor has had dozens of opportunities to hurt people over the past 3 days. Students have come and gone. Some came pretty close despite the safety barriers. He watched them. He was curious. But he never displayed aggression. Not once. Because human has somehow compromised its natural instincts. No, Jake interrupted. Because I gave him a reason not to be afraid. That's all this ever was. Fear. He was scared in that failing tank. Scared when he broke out. Scared of being hurt. You know what Razor's afraid of now? Nothing. He's fed. Comfortable. Mentally stimulated. And he knows nobody here wants to harm him. So why would he attack? Velzaran's mandibles worked silently for a moment. Council law is based on incomplete information. Dean Korthalis interjected, stepping forward with a data crystal. I am formally requesting a review of the Kra'vaxian threat classification. Professor Zalthor's preliminary findings, combined with human expertise in predator behavior, suggest these beings have been catastrophically misunderstood. And if review is denied? Then you're admitting the council values fear over facts, Jake said quietly. You're saying that an entire species deserves to be imprisoned or killed because you're too scared to try understanding them. That's not justice. That's not even good survival strategy. That's just cowardice. The word hung in the air. Calling a council official a coward was career suicide for a student. But Jake didn't flinch, didn't look away. Razor chose that moment to approach the front of his habitat. He settled into a sitting position, his posture non-threatening, and made a sound, a complex vocalization that the translators rendered as a questioning tone. 50-plus species held their collective breath as one human and one death-stalker faced down the authority of the Galactic Council. Velzeran looked at his enforcement team, at the gathered students, at the datapad of research notes. Finally, he lowered his weapon. 30-day evaluation period, he said. But human takes full responsibility. Any incident, any threat, and both are terminated. Understood. Jake's smile was fierce with victory. Crystal clear. 3 months later, the xenobiology department at Galactic University looked dramatically different. Razor's habitat had become a model for proper predator care across council space, with enrichment protocols and behavioral studies that revolutionized how dozens of species were treated. The death-stalker himself had become something of a celebrity. Students lined up for supervised observation sessions, and more than one research paper now cited belly rubs as a legitimate calming technique for aggressive fauna. Jake stood in the observation area, watching Razor work through an advanced puzzle that involved scent tracking, lever manipulation, and timing. The creature had learned to recognize 17 different students by sight, responded to basic commands, and had developed what Professor Zalthor reluctantly called playful behavior. "You've changed everything," Zalthor said, joining Jake at the window. "The Predator Control Authority is reviewing classifications for 43 species. Dean Corthales says enrollment in xenobiology has tripled. And you are being recruited by every major research institution in council space." Jake shrugged. "I just did what made sense. Treated him like a living being instead of a monster." "But this is what humans do, yes?" Zalthor asked. "You come from worlds so hostile that you must understand predators. Must learn to coexist. Other species we evolved by hiding, by fleeing, by building walls. Humans evolved by making friends with wolves. And now we're making friends with death-stalkers." Jake grinned. "Give it a few thousand years, we'll probably have them in apartments." Razor completed his puzzle and looked toward the observation window. Even through the reinforced glass, the recognition was clear. His spine flickered that contented purple, and he settled into a resting position. "He's asking for you," Zalthor noted. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "Belly rubs time. Same as every afternoon." As Jake headed toward the habitat entrance, Zalthor called after him. "The council wants human consultants on every major predator research station. They are calling it the Thompson Protocol. You are going to be very busy." Jake paused at the door, looking back with that too-wide human grin. "Good. There are a lot of misunderstood predators out there. Somebody needs to teach the galaxy what we figured out a long time ago." "What is that?" "That the scariest predator in the room isn't the one with the biggest teeth. It's the one smart enough to make the biggest teeth into an ally." Razor's contented humming echoed through the habitat, a sound of agreement from a former monster who'd become a friend. Want to see more incredible HFY stories about humans doing the impossible? Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because humanity's next adventure might be even crazier than belly rubbing a death-stalker. Drop a comment telling us what alien predator you'd want to befriend, and don't forget to like if you enjoyed Jake and Razor's story.